Hi, my name's Gary Arnold. I'm the Public Relations Coordinator for Access Living. Today we're going to talk about the employment of people with disabilities and some of the barriers to employment for people with disabilities. On February 11th, the Office of Disability Employment Policy of the Department of Labor was in town as part of its multi-city listening tour. The goal of the listening tour was to hear from people with disabilities, employers, and many others about what is working and what is not working in terms of the employment of people with disabilities. You're going to hear in this clip an interview with Kathy Martinez, who is the Assistant Director of the Office of Disability Employment Policy for the Department of Labor, and an interview with Rene David Luna, who is the Community and Economic Development Team Leader at Access Living. So here's the clip.
My name is Kathy Martinez. I'm Assistant Secretary for the Office of Disability Employment Policy for the Department of Labor. And I'm here because this is the third stop on a listening tour that the Office of Disability Employment Policy is sponsoring to learn from our stakeholders about disability and employment issues. I think, though, overall, we're learning about successful practices both in the workforce system and also with private employers. And we're also still learning about the barriers specifically faced by veterans and minorities with disabilities. What I'm hoping the listening tour will do is bring issues to the forefront, and frankly it has. The issue of federal agencies not collaborating and working separately has been one of the paramount issues that has come up. And so perhaps we could do something about that. And I think that folks with disabilities really experience, it's very hard to sort of have a seamless transition from school to work or from job to work after having become disabled, because we have to deal with so many different federal agencies that provide services. I think one of the hopes is that we can bring together federal agencies that provide these services and come up with some strategies that will allow the job seeker to have a more seamless experience when locating when locating employment, and also being retained and being promoted in employment. Many of the solutions and strategies utilized to accommodate folks with disabilities can be used to accommodate aging workers who are aging into their disabilities and may not identify as having a disability, but will say instead, I don't hear so well, I don't see so well, and at the end of the day require similar accommodations. I think if we have an inclusive workplace, it's more likely that people with non-evident disabilities will disclose. I think it's more likely that aging workers will be able to admit comfortably that they are aging into a disability and they may need an accommodation to make them more productive. And finally, I think as people with disabilities, we have had to think outside the box because we have not been able to do things in a conventional manner. And very often that's a plus with regard to running and owning a business. I think curb ramps are a wonderful example, and I know it's been used, but it's still one of the best examples I know. Curb ramps were designed for folks with disabilities to get from the street to the sidewalk, and now they're taken for granted by the general population. So I think the same could happen in employment. If we see accommodations as maybe not accommodations but productivity tools, which we all have at our fingertips when we work, we all expect computers to be there, we expect to have lights, we expect to have a desk to work at and a chair to sit in. And if we could expand our thinking to look at accommodations as productivity tools instead of something special for those quote unquote disabled people, I think we would have, it would inspire employers to have a more inclusive workplace. And I think those are some very good reasons to hire folks with disabilities. We have the right to try, and we have the right to participate in the workforce, and frankly, we have a right to fail. We really do. I think it's important to understand that We're not perfect. We have our issues like any other person. Disability happens to be one of, part of our identity. But, we're also engineers and math teachers and, hotel workers and factory workers. And I think that, we have to see more of the person than just the disability. There are successes out there. And I think so often in the disability community, we focus on the problems and we focus on the barriers. But one aspect of this tour, one thing we've wanted to know from folks is if they could please focus on successes. And those successes include the blending and braiding of services that has been done. And how could we replicate that? I think it's really critical that we spend time trying to blend and braid these services together and make sure that the person with a disability and their family knows about the services that are available. Because very often, I think when we look at employment, we feel like we don't have a lot of choice. And I think our goal at ODEP is to broaden choice, which means a range of acceptable options, and to really let folks know what those options could be. Disability crosses every ethnic, cultural, economic, gender line, and it touches all of our lives. We may not be a person with a disability, but someone in our family might be. And so it's a minority community that a person can join, and usually it's not by choice. So I guess what I have to say is for those aging baby boomers out there, this is an opportunity for you to, I guess two things. For the business owners out there, I would say hire your brothers and sisters with disabilities. And specifically, I want to address the minority business owners who tend to have small business and really don't see disability as their issue. But to employers in general, I think it's really time to realize that our workforce is aging, and many of the baby boomers who are going to age into their disabilities will not identify as having a disability. They'll say, I don't hear well, I don't see well, as I said before. But they will expect the same type of reaction time to their efforts. So I think the more we can bring folks with disabilities in the workforce, the more we can expect that we will do well, the more we can view accommodations as productivity tools instead of some special favor, the more successful we'll be and the more inclusive we'll be.
All right, well, thank you
You
very
bet.
much. I appreciate it.
Today, the Department of Labor is here, and the third stop of their tour. They've been going around the country listening to people with disabilities, service providers, and businesses, and getting input on what the Department of Labor, U.S. Department of Labor, can do to increase job opportunities for people with disabilities. They're especially looking at the needs of minorities, women, and veterans. And we're providing recommendations on the types of coordinations that need to occur between the state and federal level, and different agencies, governmental agencies, how they need to collaborate with one another to help people with disabilities find jobs. We are excited because our advocacy group, DAWN, which stands for Disabled Americans Want Work Now, has been mobilizing the disability community here in Chicago over the past year, and our numbers keep growing. Obviously, the economy is in very bad shape, and there are more and more people with disabilities without jobs. Historically, disabled people have run about 70% unemployment. We have to believe that's a lot higher now, probably 75 and 80%. People with disabilities have lost their jobs working at the government level because of the budget decreases, the budget cuts, and the economy. So it's time for disabled people to become organized, to fight collectively for jobs, too much of the emphasis has been on finding one individual job. A service provider, for example, will work and help that one individual find a job, and it gets very frustrating for the individual because there are no jobs. Now, if we can join forces and unite, and we can organize ourselves, we can make sure that all people with disabilities have opportunities for employment. That's why we're organized. We believe it's a human right to have a job for people with disabilities. And we need to find different ways of people with disabilities gaining more economic power. People with disabilities live in poverty. A lot of the poverty that exists in our country is due to the fact that disabled people don't have employment options or other economic opportunities. We need to become owners of business, of collective enterprise, cooperatives. We need to find alternative ways of creating opportunities for people so that our talents are not wasted. Right now, too many of our talents are unused and underutilized. We have skills, we have abilities, we have power to do things, but we're not very well integrated into the economy and into society. So that's what we're fighting for equal opportunity and an economic and political way.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, you've just seen an interview with Rene David Luna and with Kathy Martinez. Those were recorded on February 11th as part of the Department of Labor's listening tour, which was at Access Living here in Chicago. The tour wanted to hear from the many, many people with disabilities in Chicago and around the country who are looking for work, who want to work, but who just can't find work for many different reasons, many of which are barriers up against people with disabilities. And we're joined today by William Owens Jr. Thanks for joining us today, William.
No problem.
And I know that you are a person in that category. You're one of the many people in Chicago and like I said, around the country who are looking for work. Can you share a little bit about your experience looking for work in Chicago over the past few years?
Sure, because for the last 4 or 5 years, I've been looking for work, and the last job I had was at Dunkin' Donuts. Before that, I had a job at Burger King for 5 years, and then they closed up, and then I went and applied for a job with Dunkin' Donuts. And the doors counselor at that time was a black lady, but she didn't help me. I found it on my own. And after I called and told her I found a job with Dunkin' Donuts, then she closed my case. Okay, 1 year later I got cut loose, and like I said, they closed up and new ownership took over.
Can I interrupt you? When you say cut loose, do you mean from Dunkin' Donuts?
Yes, from Dunkin' Donuts.
So you were fired or let go of your job after having it for about a year.
Right.
Okay.
And then once the new ownership took over, they hired other people.
Okay.
And so I've been job searching ever since. And then when I got back into vocational rehab through CAP, Darlene told me there's a DOORS office here on the south side, 35th in the state in the IIT building. So I had a new DOORS counselor. Her name was Lourdes Garcia. That was in 2005. And last time I had a case open with her, she gave me some job leads, and then I went out and looked for jobs and everything. But then when I told her, I said, well, they turned me down because they feel I'm not qualified. I guess she didn't want to hear it, so when it came close to Christmas time, she told Mr. Owens, I got to close your case because you ain't found no job. And I felt that was very hurtful to me, and I felt that vocational rehab is supposed to help people with disabilities find employment, not, dump them, like a bad habit, but that's what they do. Okay. And that's the bad practices that they go by.
Right. So just to clarify a few things, you said DOORS, that stands for the Department of Rehabilitation Services, and they have a program, vocational rehabilitation program that is geared toward helping people find work.
Right.
Is that correct?
Right.
Okay. And so you feel like you went to them in an effort to help, asking them to help you in your search to find a job, but after a little while they closed your case, even though you hadn't found a job.
Right.
Okay. Okay.
And after that, you know, and then I started looking for work on my own, and I've been applying ever since, you know, and then people got this thing because, you know, we're disabled, you know, especially in the black neighborhood, they got this thing, well, you're black, you're disabled, okay, I'm not like most people. I don't turn to no streets. That's not for me. You know, I'm not gonna, you know, go to their street money. That's not for me.
Right.
I mean, that's what some people chose to do, but that's not for me.
Right.
You know, and not only hitting black people with disabilities, but it hit people with disabilities broad color lines.
Right. I really think unemployment, particularly in disability, but whether you're disabled or not, unemployment is an issue that many of us face nowadays, particularly nowadays. So it was in 2005 when you lost your job at Dunkin' Donuts. So for close to 5 years now, you've been working hard. How many applications do you think you filled out over the course of 5 years?
200 applications, and went to close to 200 interviews, and you know, went to close to 300 job sites and everything, but I just kept going, you know, and I just refused, you know, to give up, and I refused to go, you know, that easy way, you know, and I just want to prove people, you know, there's not only black people with disabilities, you know, is unemployed and hitting poverty, but there's whites, you got Chinese, you know, people out in the streets begging now, you know, for money, you know, and I feel we need to reach those people with disabilities out there who chose to go that way, you know, out there begging, you know, and so we need to reach out to them and let them know there's an alternative to the streets, you know.
Right.
You know, and we need to let them know, well, we got services here at Access Living called Dawn, and so it's an advocate group that advocates for the rights for people with disabilities to get jobs, just like Chicago Adapt is an advocate group to advocate to break down barriers against people with disabilities in schools and education and transportation and stuff.
Right. And I think you're a good representative. I think one of the stereotypes that maybe people who aren't familiar with the disability community, when maybe they hear about the high unemployment rate, they may think, well, the person is disabled, and so perhaps he or she is not able to work. But you and I know that that's wrong, right?
Right, it is.
Excuse me. I think the statistic is that of the people who are not working within the disability community, at least 2/3 of us are actively searching for work.
Right.
So you are an example of someone who's obviously capable of working. You obviously are very eager to find a job. What do you think it is, in your opinion, is that barrier that's preventing so many of us from getting that opportunity, from a employer taking a chance on us?
I think what the employer is looking at, oh, well, he's slow learning. Oh, that's going to cost us money to come up with accommodations and blah, blah, blah. And we need to sit down with the employers and let them know, yeah, just because we slow learning and just because we have different disabilities, but that don't mean that we can't function like human beings and we can't have a normal life like everybody else. And that was the perfect example of the civil rights movement, to fight for the rights of blacks to get equal to jobs. So that's the same way it should be with the disability community.
Right, exactly. I think Rene mentioned it in the clip that we watched. He said that we have a right. It's a human right to work if we want to work and we're able to work, but there's this kind of social barrier, and then sometimes it's a accommodation barrier. And I think Kathy Martinez also said something very interesting in the clip. I think that idea of accommodations is a barrier that some employees have to work through. They're afraid that means it's going to mean extra money or an undue burden on their organization or their company, perhaps. But I think Assistant Secretary Martinez said we should stop thinking of them as accommodations and start thinking of them as as job utilization tools or something,
right.
something like that.
Okay.
I know that you were not able to give testimony on February 11th at the listening tour.
Right.
But if you had the panel, Secretary Martinez as well as the others with us today, what would you like them to hear? What do you think they should know?
Well, okay, at the last town hall meeting, and I said the same thing, and I'm going to say it till I die. You know, just because we are disabled, just because we're people of color, that don't mean that we're not intelligent, and that goes for other races too. And that's what we want to show people with. I mean, we want to show society that people with disabilities of all races and colors can work and can live their own lives and can be independent and can start a family.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely, absolutely. And I think you mentioned it before. I asked you, like, what is that key barrier that we still have to overcome? And would you agree that it's maybe attitudes? You know,
Right.
people still have this kind of see this stigma surrounding disability, and I think what we need to do is organize and really present our issues and present ourselves.
Right.
Yeah. So if you were to find your ideal job, what would it be? Where would you want to be working, and what would you want to be doing?
Right now, I would like to be working in access living, and I would like to do the things that like Monica or Tom do, or your staff do, and you know, and just show people that I can, you know, talented, and I can help out, and I can do whatever, you know, the bosses there ask me to do.
Yeah. Well, I, for one, will say that I think you'd be a great asset to the Access Living staff, and Access Living is an organization that works with people with disabilities to live more independently. Now, we've talked about this listening tour a little bit, which is going around the country, listening to people, and then they're going to develop strategies, national strategies, to try to address employment issues. And we talked about your situation a little bit. Talk a little bit about, you mentioned Dawn, and Rene in the clip mentioned Dawn. That stands for Disabled Americans Want Work Now.
Right.
What are some of the things you're working on with Dawn right now?
Right now, we are coming up with a job empowerment club. I'm working with Michelle on that, as well as Rene, and we're trying to come up with more employment programs where we can show people how to do resume writing, you know, and not only reinvent ourselves, but reinvent the resume, you know, and trying to do it to the best of our standards. And I need to talk to Rene. We need a plan to have job fairs and see if we can get the employers to come and tell them about, you know, our horror stories and how I feel to be discriminated against because we have a disability. But that shouldn't want to stop the employers want to hire us and treat us like an equal, you know, and that's what the civil rights movement did for blacks. For years, us blacks struggled to get jobs and housing and all of that until Martin Luther King and Jesse Jackson came along to make it where now we got the things that we want, but now the disability community needs to step up and do the same thing.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right. Well, we've just got a few minutes left, William, so I think before we go, I just want to remind people that if they want to get involved with Dawn, which you are a part of, and which is an active group in Chicago working to address employment barriers and empower people with disabilities in their search to find work, Dawn meets the second and the fourth Tuesday, I believe. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It means the fourth Thursday of each month, and you can contact Access Living to learn more. And also there's a job empowerment club at Access Living, and that meets the first and the third Tuesday of each month. So before we wind up, is there any final thought you want to share?
You know, I just want to let people with disabilities of all races and cultures know, do some volunteer work. You know, don't give up. Just do some volunteer work, and that will lead to a stepping stone to find a job in the future. So if your parents started complaining and saying, oh, well, you've been doing this for a long time and they not helping you, you know, but just keep doing it. God going to find a way to prove the parents wrong and everybody else.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, William. I've really enjoyed talking to you. And thank you for sharing, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Okay.